Adolf Hitler once called him the Iron Heart of the Reich. Cold, brilliant, merciless. Reinhard Heydrich was feared not only by his enemies but even by his fellow Nazis. As the architect of the final solution, his power stretched across a continent. But in the spring of 1942, on a quiet street in Prague, a handful of resistance fighters dared the impossible to strike at the very heart of Nazi terror. What followed was an assassination that shook the Third Reich to its core and triggered one of the most brutal reprisals of the war. This is the story of Reinhard Heydrich, his rise, his reign of terror, and his violent end. Reinhard Tristan Eugen Heydrich was born on March 7, 1904, in the town of Halle, situated along the river Saale. He was not born into poverty or obscurity, nor, ironically, into the military class. His family were musicians. His father, Richard Bruno Heydrich, was a composer, a professional opera singer, and a music educator. Bruno Heydrich was born into poverty. His father died when he was very young, and his mother, a washerwoman, raised 6 children alone. But Bruno was gifted, musically, intellectually, and in ambition. Through sheer discipline, he became a singer and composer. After performing across Europe, he returned to Halle and founded the Halle Conservatory for Music and Theatre in 1901. Within 3 years, it grew from 20 to 190 students. 11 teachers, assistants, and even a secretary joined the staff, his family living in the grand house above the conservatory. In this rare photo, you can see Reinhard, his brother, his sister, and his mother Elizabeth. Reinhard Heydrich's mother, Elizabeth, was a devout Catholic and piano teacher. Elizabeth played a decisive role in shaping her children's outlook and was particularly strict with Reinhard. From the start, he was taught to move, speak, and present himself as a model of national and moral discipline. He played the violin with exceptional skill, eventually reaching a concert-level proficiency that astonished those who heard him. Young Reinhard clearly benefited from the musical talents of his parents. Reinhard's father supported his early interest in music, and in 1910, when Reinhard was just 6 years old, Bruno took him to a major musical event at the Halle City Theatre, a performance of The Ring of the Nibelung, the classic music drama of Richard Wagner. This experience ignited a lifelong love for romantic music in Reinhard, especially the mythic world portrayed in Wagner's operas, a deep passion he would later share with Adolf Hitler. Reinhard grew up under a regime of strict rules and exacting expectations. He was a gifted child, particularly in music and academics. He played the violin with near-professional skill and spoke in formal, high-register German even as a boy. His parents pushed him hard, but not out of cruelty, but ambition. Despite his later fixation on physical fitness, Reinhard Heydrich was a physically weak and sickly child. He was small, slender, and often ill, which led his parents to actively encourage him to take up all kinds of physical activities from an early age, such as swimming, running, football, sailing, horseback riding, and fencing. These efforts laid the foundation for his lifelong enthusiasm for sports. The family typically spent their summer holidays along the scenic Baltic coast, in the upscale seaside resort town of Swinemünde on Usedom Island. For the Heydrich children, these vacations were a highlight of the year, filled with sightseeing, nature walks, boat rides, and long, joyful days at the beach. Heydrich had good relations with his family, but not with his classmates. He was physically thin, blonde, pale, and often bullied. Heydrich's classmates used to tease him because they found him effeminate. They used to bully him relentlessly because of his high-pitched voice, which is why he was nicknamed Siege, meaning the goat.
Ich bin der Überzeugung, dass damit seitens der Bevölkerung Böhmen und Mährens sinnbildlich jene aufrichtige Gesinnung und Reichstreue zum Ausdruck kommt, die Sie, Herr Staatspräsident, in echter Wenzeltradition verkörpern.
This nickname humiliated him, but he didn't break. He hardened, he withdrew, focused inward, mastered his music and studies. Even in childhood, he showed signs of cold intelligence and a need for control. Reinhard Heydrich's academic performance was above average, with particularly outstanding results in science subjects. As a teenager, he aspired to become a chemist. At the same time, he developed a deep fascination with crime fiction and spy novels, many of which were serialized in newspapers. British and American detective stories from Sherlock Holmes to Nick Carter and Nat Pinkerton were wildly popular in Germany and captured Heydrich's imagination. It was this very addiction to spy novels that would later go on to completely alter the course of Heydrich's life. In the summer of 1914, while the Heydrich family was vacationing on the Baltic coast as usual, their stable and orderly life was suddenly disrupted by a major event. On June 28th, the assassination of Austrian heir Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo triggered a crisis that would soon escalate into the First World War. For young Reinhard Heydrich, who was just 10 at the time, the full significance of what was happening around him was hard to grasp. He belonged to the war youth generation, too young to fight, but old enough to understand that this war was a defining moment both for his country and for himself. Even though no one in his immediate family went off to battle, the war was ever present. Newspapers and posters glorified military successes. Classrooms displayed photos of famous generals and decorated alumni, and teachers regularly announced new victories during assemblies. Over time, older students at his school began disappearing to the front lines. By June 1915, around 80% of the senior-most boys had volunteered for the army, while younger ones, like Reinhard, waited eagerly for their chance to follow. For boys his age, the war likely felt like a thrilling, far-off adventure. They believed Germany would surely win, a belief further fueled by the wildly popular war story magazines aimed at teens. But the enthusiasm of the German people quickly vanished after the shocking realization that Germany had lost the war. Up until the fall of 1918, German propaganda had assured the public that victory was near. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, signed earlier that spring to seal Germany's triumph over Russia, only strengthened the belief that defeating Britain and France was just a matter of time. So, when the armistice was suddenly signed in November 1918, it came as a devastating and unexpected blow, shattering the hopes of countless Germans. The abruptness of the Allied victory, just months after Germany's initially successful spring offensive, left many in disbelief. It seemed impossible to accept that the German military had truly been defeated. This disbelief gave rise to a powerful and dangerous myth, the infamous stab in the back legend, which claimed that Germany's undefeated army had been betrayed by disloyal revolutionaries back home. Germany had lost over 2 million men in action, and more than 4.1 million soldiers were wounded out of an overall population of 65 million. The country had spent the equivalent of some $40 billion on the war, most of which it had borrowed from its citizens. In the Treaty of Versailles, Germany lost 13% of its territory and was required to pay $33 billion as a war indemnity to the victors. After the war, all of Germany plunged into instability. Across the country, communist and right-wing paramilitary groups were violently clashing with each other. And soon, these violent confrontations reached Heydrich's hometown of Halle as well. The Heydrich family's musical business also collapsed, leading to significant financial losses. Reinhard, now a teenager, watched this unfold. And though he did not yet join any movement, his hatred of disorder and longing for hierarchy took root. As a result, Heydrich was now about to choose a career path that his family could never have even imagined. In the late spring of 1922, after earning top marks in his final school exams, Reinhard decided to pursue a career as a naval officer. The Heydrichs had mixed feelings about Reinhard's career decision. His mother felt proud of his ambition to join the Navy, but his father was disappointed that his musically gifted son wouldn't be continuing the family's musical legacy. Still, Reinhard stood firm, and on April 1st, 1922, he officially began his journey as a naval cadet in Kiel, together with dozens of other cadets of Crew 22. Heydrich remained an isolated loner throughout his time in Kiel and had no friends among the crew. While it is true that Heydrich found it difficult to adjust to the new environment, the reasons for his outsider status remain unclear. One of his crew colleagues remembered after the Second World War,
Heydrich's appearance was of remarkable disharmony. His limbs somehow did not fit together. A long, narrow, and much too small head sat on a long neck, with short blonde hair, a long nose, mistrustful squinting eyes that stood very close together, and a small mouth, whose gaping lips he usually pinched together. A long upper body with almost ape-like arms sat over a deep, broad pelvis, a husky build with rounded, unmuscular legs. He appeared gangly, somewhat soft and effeminate.
Heydrich was probably seen as an outsider, partly because of his refined middle-class upbringing. While most naval cadets embraced the tough and masculine culture of the Navy, Heydrich would quietly play his violin during his free time. This habit made him stand out, and not in a good way. His love for music often became a reason for others to mock him. But slowly Heydrich's position began to improve. He became a dedicated sailor, eventually winning both the Baltic Sea and North Sea championships. Alongside being an exceptional seaman, he also grew into a skilled sportsperson. Now, Heydrich was promoted to second naval lieutenant. After his promotion, he appears to have gained more recognition from his colleagues and was no longer mocked as often. His superiors frequently gave him recognition and good evaluations. With every sign of recognition, his zeal increased, and so did his arrogance. Ambition was undoubtedly Heydrich's strongest characteristic. He wanted to accomplish something, and others were supposed to be amazed. Now, he was dreaming to become naval chief or admiral. Although his relationship with the other young officers improved significantly, Heydrich started showing a clear sense of arrogance towards his subordinates, a trait that would grow even more prominent in the 1930s. On 1st July 1928, Heydrich was promoted to first lieutenant. He now had significantly more free time, which he largely devoted to sport, music, and a third area of interest: women. He repeatedly sought the company of women whom he could impress with his officer's uniform, his good manners, and his musical talents. His efforts were not without success, as one of his fellow officers recalled after the war.
He left an impression more than once, particularly on older ladies.
On the 6th of December 1930, at a naval ball, Heydrich met a woman who would completely alter the course of his life. Her name was Lina von Osten. The moment Heydrich laid eyes on this cute 19-year-old blonde, he was instantly smitten. Lina also liked Heydrich from the very first meeting. Although his skull looked like it had been assembled with leftover parts, he was 6'3", athletic, and an officer in the Navy. Basically, he was a walking Tinder profile. Lina described Heydrich as tall, manly, and very self-assured in his uniform. In today's TikTok era, where girls scroll past one handsome guy after another, and their standards have shot through the roof, calling Heydrich a weird skull kind of makes sense. But back in those days, Heydrich was the full package: tall, athletic, and in uniform. Basically, a walking green flag with a slightly dented head. Heydrich proposed to Lina, and she said yes. After that, he started writing her love letters.
My dearest Lina, in the midst of the hustle and bustle of work and in a great hurry before my departure, I wanted you to know that all my thoughts are with you, and I realize now how much I love you. That is why I am looking forward all the more to the life that lies ahead of us. With you, I could endure every sorrow. Much love, your Reinhard.
Lina was just 19 years old, so of course she couldn't marry a guy with a weird-looking skull just like that. Heydrich had to get her parents' approval first. Heydrich went to Lina's house to convince her parents. Her parents could find no fault with Heydrich. A smart and ambitious naval officer with a seemingly secure pension and an apparently bright career ahead of him was more than the Ostens might have expected. It suited their image of a prospective son-in-law, so they said yes without any hesitation. The two officially got engaged. Now Heydrich started writing letters not just to Lina, but to her parents as well.
Dear parents-in-law, back in service and hard at work, I would like to thank you once more with all my heart for having received me so kindly and like a son in your house. I will never forget my first days in Lina's childhood home. I am so grateful to you for your consent to our engagement. I realize more and more every day that it was the right thing to do. Lina does not have to resort to secrecy in Kiel, and we can be together often and get to know each other better and better without having to pay attention to the gossip of others. Regarding our wedding date, please allow us to marry in September. There is nothing worse than uncertainty. I would be very, very grateful to you if you could agree on September. My parents, too, will be available then. Accept my sincere thanks. Your Reinhard.
Lina thought she'd bagged herself a tall, athletic Navy officer with dreamy love letters and a violin on the side. What could possibly go wrong? Well, everything. Turns out, Reinhard Heydrich had more exes than a Game of Thrones character, and one of them wasn't ready to stay buried in the past. Just as he was busy writing "Forever Yours" to Lina, a ghost from his romantic graveyard rose up, and she wasn't sending best wishes. Heydrich had the announcement of his and Lina's engagement published in the newspaper. Back in the early 1900s, and even mid-20th century, it was quite common, especially among middle or upper-class families in Europe and America, to publish engagement announcements in local or national newspapers. It was a way to publicly declare the engagement, also a status symbol. If it had happened today, Reinhard might have simply uploaded a polished photo to Instagram, captioned it "engaged" and tagged Lina. Heydrich had officially gotten engaged to Lina and even sent out a newspaper announcement to his friends and acquaintances. But one of the people who received it was a young woman from Berlin, someone Heydrich had met at a ball more than 6 months earlier. They had grown very close and even shared a physical relationship. They visited each other in Berlin and Kiel, and the woman believed that she was engaged to Heydrich. But when she saw the engagement notice in the newspaper with someone else's name on it, her world came crashing down. Devastated and humiliated, the poor woman suffered a nervous breakdown. We don't know her name, but we do know one important detail. Her father had strong connections with senior officers in the Navy. When he found out what had happened, he used those connections to file a complaint against Heydrich. And just like that, Heydrich was about to land in serious trouble. Because of this complaint, Heydrich was tried in a military court and was kicked out of the Navy. Breaking off an engagement was clearly a violation of the Officer Corps' Code of Conduct, but it wasn't a serious enough offense to get someone kicked out automatically. The whole embarrassing incident could have easily been dismissed as little more than a personal misunderstanding, or perhaps just some girl's tale. However, Heydrich's arrogant attitude pushed things too far, and ultimately got him into real trouble. Rather than owning up to his actions and accepting a minor punishment, Heydrich chose to shift the blame. He claimed it was the woman who had initiated their physical relationship, and flatly denied ever making any promise of marriage. His dismissive attitude toward their affair, and the way he trivialized it, only served to irritate the court officials further. Heydrich wasn't dismissed because of the affair itself, but because of how he behaved in court. He didn't have the courage to admit the truth, take the blame, or defend the woman. And that's what got him kicked out, not the actual offense itself. On 30 April 1931, Heydrich's promising naval career came to an abrupt and unexpected end. Initially, Heydrich hoped he might be reinstated, but his official appeal to Reich President Paul von Hindenburg was rejected. Heydrich was suddenly confronted by the grim reality of being unemployed in 1931, in the midst of the Great Depression. His future looked gloomy. He locked himself in his room and cried for days in rage and self-pity. Lina remembered after the war,
Getting kicked out from the Navy was the heaviest blow of his life. It wasn't about losing his salary. It was the pain of losing the career he had completely dedicated himself to.
But even after everything that had happened, Lina did not leave Heydrich's side. In her heart, she had made a vow. If she were ever to marry, it would be Reinhard Heydrich and no one else. Behind every successful man, there is a woman. In Heydrich's case, it was going to be behind every successful evil man, there is an evil woman. Lina was a staunch anti-Semite and a committed Nazi. Don't let Lina's sweet little face fool you. Behind that angelic smile was a hardcore Nazi fangirl. However, Heydrich lacked any interest in political parties. He hadn't even heard of Hitler's Mein Kampf, and would often crack jokes about the Nazi leader, calling him just a bohemian corporal. As for Goebbels, he mocked him too, referring to him as that cripple. You might be surprised to know that even Heydrich's former naval colleagues described him as a liberal, but Lina was friends with Karl von Eberstein, a high-ranking officer in the Nazi party. Through him, she managed to arrange an interview between the unemployed Heydrich and SS Chief Heinrich Himmler. At first, Heydrich himself seemed unsure about joining the Nazis, but Lina encouraged him to seriously consider the opportunity. It was only when Eberstein offered him the prospect of an elevated position at the Nazi party headquarters that Heydrich finally agreed. The possibility of an elevated position existed because Himmler was planning to create an intelligence department within the SS, and he needed competent people for it. The previously mostly apolitical Heydrich, who hadn't even read Mein Kampf or heard of the SS before, was now about to step into the most radical paramilitary wing of Hitler's movement. He followed that path not out of deep ideological conviction, but because Nazism offered him the opportunity to return to a structured life in uniform, providing along with it a sense of purpose and a way of regaining the confidence of Lina and her family of devoted Nazis. On the 14th of June, 1931, the date of Heydrich's interview finally arrived. Himmler, unsurprisingly, was immediately impressed the moment he first laid eyes on Heydrich. Heydrich had blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, stood 6 feet 3 inches tall, and was physically well built, exactly the kind of man the Nazis were looking for to fit their Aryan race propaganda. Himmler informed Heydrich about his plans to develop an intelligence service within the SS. To evaluate his potential, Himmler asked him to sketch out an organizational structure for this proposed SS intelligence agency, and gave him just 20 minutes to do it. Heydrich had no prior training in espionage, but relying on bits and pieces he'd picked up from reading cheap crime thrillers and spy novels over the years, he quickly put together a plan, dressing it up in formal military language. Ironically, this basic understanding still exceeded Himmler's own knowledge. Impressed by Heydrich's response, Himmler decided to hire him on the spot. The fact that Heydrich chose a role in the SS instead of any of the better-paid jobs that were on offer was due to a number of factors. His desire to impress his wife and her family with a job in the political movement they supported. The role also had a military-like structure, which appealed to his background. Most of all, it offered him an exciting role within a radical organization that openly rejected the very political system he believed had unfairly ended his promising naval career. At that point in time, the SS was still a small and relatively unimportant unit. It had originally been formed as Hitler's personal bodyguard, following his release from Landsberg prison, where he had spent much of 1924 due to his failed coup attempt in Munich the year before. Initially, the SS operated under the command of the SA and remained a subordinate group for several years. However, it soon began to view itself as an elite formation, Hitler's loyal guard of honor, fiercely dedicated to him and the Nazi cause. Heydrich thus joined the SS at an important turning point in its history, which partly helps to explain the organization's appeal for him. The SS promised a career in uniform and the opportunity for rapid advancement within a still malleable body that promoted revolutionary views for the reordering of Germany. Even if the pay was modest, the new activity offered Heydrich, as an ardent reader of crime fiction, a job in an elite organization that boosted his shaken self-confidence. Heydrich, still new and lacking street credibility, had to prove himself through direct confrontation. He did so in brutal street battles against communists and social democrats. During these raids, small SS motor squads would storm political meetings and vanish before the police could react. Heydrich quickly gained a fearsome reputation as the leader of one such unit. In Hamburg's communist circles, he became known as the Blond Beast, a name earned by the ruthless efficiency and military precision of his commando group. Then, after some months, Heydrich returned to Munich to take up his new position at the Nazi Party headquarters, the infamous Brown House, where Himmler officially appointed him as the head of the SS's newly envisioned intelligence division, the Sicherheitsdienst, or SD. In its earliest form, the SD had a clear twofold mission. First, to gather intelligence on political opponents, especially the communists and the social democrats. But second, and far more sensitive, was to root out police informers and undercover communist agents hiding within the Nazi Party itself. This latter task would repeatedly land the SD in trouble, as it walked a fine line between loyalty and paranoia. Yet, for all its future infamy, the SD's origins were humble. In fact, it began as a one-man operation. Reinhard Heydrich was the SD's sole employee, investigator, clerk, analyst, and typist all in one. With almost no budget, he set up a primitive index card system to record the names and affiliations of suspected enemies of the party. He didn't even have his own office or equipment. Heydrich had to share a desk and even a typewriter with Richard Hildebrandt, chief of staff of the tiny SS Division South. But from that cramped room in the Brown House, Heydrich began laying the foundation for a secret police apparatus that would one day terrorize Europe. Heydrich worked 18 hours a day, obsessively. He didn't leave the office, he barely slept. Every file was a puzzle, every whisper a potential lead. In time, the SD grew, informants were recruited, files multiplied, operations expanded. But in those early days, it was Heydrich alone, driven by humiliation, vengeance, and ambition. What started as a desk in a shared room soon evolved into the Nazi Party's most feared intelligence machine. By the end of 1931, Heydrich had stabilized his career and secured his financial footing to such a degree that he was finally able to marry his longtime fiancée. On 26 December 1931, the weird skull and the blonde Nazi fangirl were officially married. To mark the happy occasion, Himmler promoted Heydrich to SS Major just 7 days after his promotion to SS Captain. In just 15 months since joining the SS, Heydrich had already surpassed the rank he once held in the Navy. Even if being a naval officer remained more prestigious than an SS career at this point, Heydrich must have felt that his life was back on track. In June 1932, Heydrich's SD grew even stronger. As a result, Himmler promoted him to the rank of SS Colonel. Heydrich's rapid rise in the SS hierarchy and his scarcely disguised ambition earned him many enemies. By June 1932, whispers turned to accusations. The old rumor about his supposed Jewish ancestry resurfaced with a vengeance. This time, it posed a serious threat. After all, Heydrich was now a rising star in a political movement that was built on staunch anti-Semitism. The rumor originated from Halle, his hometown. Local Nazi Party members, likely envious of his rapid ascent, fanned the flames. On the 6th of June, the Gauleiter of Halle, Rudolf Jordan, formally wrote to the party's organizational chief, Gregor Strasser, raising a pointed concern. He mentioned a party member with the name of Reinhard Heydrich, whose father lives in Halle. There is reason to assume that his father, Bruno Heydrich, is a Jew. Alarmed, Strasser handed the case to Dr. Achim Gerke, the Nazi Party's chief genealogist and head of their information office. Less than 2 weeks later, on the 22nd of June, Gerke responded. His report cleared Heydrich completely. He was of German origin and free from any trace of colored or Jewish blood. Gerke dismissed the claims as slander and took full responsibility for the assessment, even offering to defend it in court if necessary. Despite this clarification, Heydrich was deeply shaken by the re-emergence of the damaging rumors only a year after his dismissal from the Navy, rumors that threatened his carefully rebuilt professional existence. Partly as a result of this embarrassing and potentially career-terminating episode, Heydrich devoted great energy to his work in the summer of 1932. His ambitions continued to be vast. The rumor that Reinhard Heydrich had Jewish ancestry started because of a misunderstanding around his family name. In a 1916 edition of a music encyclopedia, Heydrich's father, Bruno, was listed as Bruno Süß. Süß was the surname of Bruno's stepfather, not Bruno's biological father. The word Süß sounded Jewish to many people, especially in a society obsessed with racial purity like Nazi Germany. But in reality, Süß was not a Jewish name in this case, and it didn't come from a Jewish family. But in an anti-Semitic environment, even this kind of mix-up could cause serious problems. Because of this, many people wrongly assumed that Reinhard had Jewish blood. The rumor had existed since his childhood, where some of his classmates used to mock him by calling him the White Jew or White Moses. These were meant as insults, based on nothing more than stereotypes and jealousy. Anyways, in 1933, the Nazis seized power and almost immediately unleashed a wave of suppression and violence. But Reinhard Heydrich didn't play a major role in the initial street-level terror that swept Berlin. Instead, he watched from the sidelines, calculating, waiting, and plotting his next move to take control of the very machinery of the German state. Under the old Weimar Republic, Germany had no unified police system. Each state maintained its own law enforcement agencies, a fragmented system ripe for exploitation. Heydrich and his superior, Heinrich Himmler, saw this as an opportunity, but to transform it, they needed to centralize power, uniting the various state and local police forces under a single command, the SS. They began with Bavaria, one of Germany's largest and most influential states. Its capital, Munich, was the birthplace of Nazism. But the regional government remained hesitant to accept full Nazi control. That hesitation quickly vanished after consistent threats of violence were made against local officials. Ultimately, Bavaria folded, recognizing Hitler's authority. With the political resistance crushed, Heydrich took over the Bavarian political police, reorganizing it according to SS principles. Under his command, the police began rounding up communists, social democrats, union leaders, and Jews. Many were sent to newly built concentration camps, like Dachau, and Bavaria was just the beginning. One by one, Heydrich and Himmler bullied and coerced other German states into accepting Nazi control. As each state submitted, its police forces were absorbed by the SS. By summer 1934, the only major law enforcement body not under SS control was in Prussia. This wasn't because Prussia was reluctant to accept the Nazis. In fact, its state president, Hermann Göring, was a leading member of the Nazi Party. The real issue was power. Göring commanded Prussia's secret police, the Gestapo, and he had no intention of handing it over to Himmler and Heydrich. However, Göring found himself caught between two dangerous forces, the SS, growing more powerful by the day, and Ernst Röhm, the head of the unruly SA, or Brown Shirts. Röhm had become increasingly volatile, even threatening a second revolution to purge so-called traitors within the party. As tensions continue to rise, Göring reluctantly agreed to cede control of the Gestapo to the more disciplined SS. It wasn't just Göring. Hitler himself feared that Röhm, backed by nearly 3 million men in the SA, might one day overthrow him. Even the German army was growing increasingly alarmed by Röhm's ambitions and the SA's growing influence. On April 22, 1934, 30-year-old Reinhard Heydrich was appointed acting head of the Gestapo. The SS now had the political police in its hands, and it was time to deal with Röhm. Heydrich moved quickly. He allegedly fabricated a dossier accusing Röhm of plotting a coup. The evidence, real or not, was convincing enough for Hitler. Heydrich drew up hit lists. And between June 30th and July 2nd, 1934, the SS struck in what became known as the Night of the Long Knives. Hundreds of SA leaders were arrested and executed, including Ernst Röhm himself. And mind you, Ernst Röhm was also the godfather of Heydrich's child. Despite this personal bond, Heydrich showed no hesitation when it came to orchestrating Röhm's downfall. With the SA destroyed, the SS emerged as the dominant power, and the Gestapo became its weapon. From this moment on, Heydrich and Himmler controlled the entire law enforcement apparatus of Nazi Germany. People of the same blood should be in the same Reich. Hitler's dream was to unite Germany and Austria, two nations he believed were destined to be one. And on March 12, 1938, that dream turned into reality. As tensions across Europe reached a breaking point, Hitler made his move. He annexed Austria. On March 12, 1938, German troops marched into Vienna, forcing the Austrian Chancellor to step down. This event would later be called the Anschluss. Soon after, Heydrich's SD and Gestapo began cleaning house. They arrested anyone who might stand in the way: communists, supporters of the old government, and royalists. In just a few days, they detained over 21,000 people, most of whom were sent straight to concentration camps. After the Anschluss, Hitler set his sights on Czechoslovakia, particularly the Sudetenland, a German-speaking border region. He claimed he was protecting ethnic Germans, but in truth, it was part of a larger plan to dominate Eastern Europe. In September 1938, under pressure from Hitler and with the infamous Munich Agreement, Britain and France handed over the Sudetenland without a fight, but Hitler wasn't satisfied. Just a few months later, in March 1939, Nazi forces invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. The country was torn apart. The Slovak Republic became a puppet state, and the remaining lands were turned into the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, which was directly governed by the Nazis. And once again, Heydrich's men swept in. His SS and Gestapo forces crushed resistance in Prague, just as they had done in Vienna. But these repressive crackdowns weren't the main act, they were just the warm-up. The real test for Heydrich's cruelty came next in Poland. As Germany prepared for war, Heydrich was given two major tasks. First, his SD units were to engage in small-scale border skirmishes immediately before the planned invasion, which would give Hitler a pretext for invading Poland. Essentially, Heydrich was leading a false flag operation. Second, Hitler wanted the Polish elite completely wiped out. This became Operation Tannenberg, a secret plan to destroy Poland's leadership and spirit. Heydrich created a list of 61,000 prominent Poles to be tracked down and killed. This list included intellectuals, religious leaders, politicians, Jews, and communists. To carry this out, Heydrich turned to his Einsatzgruppen, brutal squads of SS and Gestapo members. Originally formed during the Czechoslovakian takeover, these units now had one purpose: mass executions. Within weeks of the invasion, 2,000 Einsatzgruppen soldiers murdered over 16,000 civilians. And according to historian Volker Ulrich, That number would rise to 40,000 by the end of the year. This was a turning point. Heydrich wasn't just locking people up, he was ordering mass killings, and he was doing it with speed and precision. This wasn't just about loyalty to Hitler. It seemed like Heydrich was starting to enjoy the bloodshed. Some say he was trying to make up for his past failures in the Navy, while others believe he saw extreme violence as a way to cement his power inside the SS. But one thing was certain: Operation Tannenberg was the moment Heydrich truly became what Hitler later called the man with the iron heart. A man so evil that even Hitler called him the man with the iron heart. The interval has arrived, so if you're still watching this video till now, comment "I love you, Roger" below. Dropping this comment will motivate me to keep making these long, highly researched videos. It'll also let me know that people actually watch these long documentaries. So don't forget to comment "I love you, Roger." Now let's get back to our story. As war raged across Europe, the Nazi leadership recognized a growing need to tighten their grip. Not just over Germany, but over the lands they were about to conquer. They needed order, ruthless and centralized control. And so, just weeks after the invasion of Poland, the Nazi regime created something entirely new, something terrifying. On September 27, 1939, the Nazis officially established the RSHA, Reichssicherheitshauptamt, or the Reich Main Security Office. Its goal was simple: centralize all of Nazi Germany's security and intelligence services into one powerful organization. One that would answer only to Himmler and, ultimately, Hitler. And to lead it, they chose Reinhard Heydrich. Heydrich was already feared as the head of the SD and the Gestapo, but now, with the RSHA, he was given authority over far more than just surveillance. Under his control, the RSHA combined the SD, the Gestapo, the Kripo, or German criminal police, and several smaller agencies, all responsible for investigation, racial policy, and enforcement. This meant that Heydrich now had eyes everywhere, in cities, in villages, in concentration camps, in military zones, even within the Nazi Party itself. Every whisper of resistance, every act of defiance, every citizen deemed a threat to the Reich was now under Heydrich's jurisdiction. And this wasn't just power, it was total surveillance. With the creation of the RSHA, Reinhard Heydrich became the single most powerful figure in the entire Nazi security apparatus. He was no longer just the man behind the curtain. He was the man watching the entire stage. In the spring of 1941, Heydrich was informed about Operation Barbarossa, the Nazi plan to launch a surprise invasion of the Soviet Union. Hitler believed that by striking quickly, he could crush the Soviets, dominate the entire European continent, and finally defeat Britain. But this wasn't just a military campaign, it was a war of annihilation. Hitler knew that a war against the communists was going to be a war of ideologies, which required total annihilation of one side or the other. Hitler saw communism and the Soviet system as an existential threat. He believed the only way to destroy an ideology was through absolute brutality, and Heydrich's Einsatzgruppen was ideal for the task. In preparation for the invasion, Heydrich issued deliberately vague orders to his men. He simply told them to target, quote, all Jews in the service of the Communist Party and the state. That was all the green light they needed. On June 22, 1941, around 4 million Axis troops crossed into the Soviet Union in what would become the largest land invasion in human history. As the German army pushed east, Heydrich's Einsatzgruppen followed close behind, unleashing a wave of terror throughout the Soviet Union. The Einsatzgruppen killed approximately 1.3 to 1.5 million people in the Soviet Union. One of the most infamous atrocities occurred in Babi Yar, just outside of Kiev. Over the course of 2 days, an Einsatzgruppen unit murdered 33,000 Jews in a nearby ravine. While Reinhard Heydrich's Einsatzgruppen were unleashing a wave of terror across the Soviet Union, on the other side of the front lines, Heydrich himself was flying combat missions. Yes, apart from being a failed naval officer and a brutal Nazi leader, Heydrich also considered himself a fighter pilot. During the earlier Norwegian campaign, he had already flown several reconnaissance and support missions, craving recognition as a man of action, not just a desk-bound bureaucrat. And in 1941, as Operation Barbarossa unfolded, Heydrich insisted on taking to the skies once again, this time over Soviet territory. But during one of those missions, his aircraft was shot down. But somehow, he survived the crash and managed to escape before Soviet forces could capture him. It was a narrow escape, and it shook the Nazi high command. Heinrich Himmler was furious. He ordered Heydrich to stop flying immediately. He was too valuable to lose. But this episode revealed something crucial about Heydrich's personality, his recklessness, his thirst for adventure, and his relentless ambition. He didn't just want to be feared as a ruthless strategist. He wanted to prove himself a warrior too. It was this dangerous mix of intellect, cruelty, and boldness that made Heydrich one of the deadliest men in the Third Reich. But this very reckless spirit of adventure would ultimately become the cause of Heydrich's death. After Germany invaded Czechoslovakia in March 1939, Hitler split the country into two parts. The first was the Slovak Republic, a puppet state under the control of the Nazis, with Josef Tiso installed as its president. The second was the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, which was placed under direct Nazi rule. This region was strategically important to Hitler, not just politically, but economically as well. Bohemia and Moravia were rich in raw materials that were crucial for the German war effort, including coal, iron, steel, and other industrial resources. It also had a strong manufacturing base, especially in arms and machinery, which the Nazis quickly absorbed into their military economy. At first, Hitler appointed Konstantin von Neurath, a conservative diplomat, to oversee the area. But Neurath was too soft for Hitler's liking. He tried to maintain order using traditional means, diplomacy, compromise, and minimal violence. The result? Strikes, sabotage, and growing Czech resistance. By 1941, Hitler had had enough. He needed someone ruthless, someone who would crush resistance without hesitation. And so he turned to Reinhard Heydrich. Heydrich already had a reputation as one of the most feared men in the Third Reich. He was brutal, loyal, and efficient. Hitler believed Heydrich could do what von Neurath couldn't: break the will of the Czech people and turn the Protectorate into a model of Nazi order and productivity. In September 1941, Heydrich was appointed acting Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia. From the moment he arrived in Prague, he ruled with an iron fist. He executed over 400 people in his first few months, targeting resistance members, intellectuals, and anyone suspected of disloyalty. Thousands more were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Streets were silenced by fear. And yet, alongside the terror, Heydrich improved food rations and working conditions, not out of compassion, but to keep the Czech factories running for the Nazi war effort. On 20 January 1942, Heydrich summoned a secret conference of high-ranking Nazi officials at Wannsee. After this conference, the tragic fate of millions of Jews was sealed. But Heydrich may have also triggered an ancient curse. In Prague Castle, kept under heavy guard, lay the crown of Saint Wenceslas. According to Czech legend, any usurper who dares to place the crown on his head, someone unworthy of the Bohemian throne, will die within a year. The legend dates back centuries and is tied to Saint Wenceslas, the patron saint of Bohemia. The crown is said to be sacred, a divine symbol of Czech sovereignty. To wear it unlawfully is not only treasonous but fatal. It is rumoured, even believed by many, that Heydrich, in a moment of arrogance or mockery, privately wore the crown of St. Wenceslas while alone inside Prague castle. There were no witnesses, but whispers of the act spread quickly. If true, it would mean that he had fulfilled the exact condition of the ancient curse, an unworthy ruler placing the sacred Bohemian crown on his head, and just as the legend warned, any such man would die within a year. And in Heydrich's case, the curse didn't miss. Heydrich's reign of terror in Prague had not gone unnoticed. Back in Britain, the Czechoslovak government in exile, led by President Edward Banish, had been closely watching the Protectorate's suffering. They knew that to inspire hope at home and prove their loyalty to the Allies, they needed to strike a decisive blow. Something that would send a message, not just to the Nazis, but to the whole world. And so, a daring plan was born. The plan was simple. Assassinate Reinhard Heydrich, the most powerful Nazi in occupied Europe. The operation would be called Anthropoid. To carry it out, the Czech government in exile turned to the British Special Operations Executive, the SOE. The SOE trained exiled soldiers from Czechoslovakia in sabotage, explosives, guerrilla tactics, and silent killing. The original plan was to send Josef Gabčík, a Slovak, and Karel Svoboda, a Czech staff sergeant. They were chosen for the mission on October 28, 1941, Czechoslovakia's Independence Day, a symbolic date meant to echo national defiance. But before deployment, Svoboda suffered a head injury during training. He had to be replaced. The new candidate, Jan Kubiš, a Czech artilleryman. But Kubiš hadn't completed his training, nor had his false identity documents been prepared. The mission was delayed. Finally, when everything was in place, these two men were selected for what would become one of the most daring operations of the war. 30-year-old Josef Gabčík and 27-year-old Jan Kubiš. Gabčík had served in the Czechoslovak army and was known for his sharp mind and technical skills. Kubiš had fought in the artillery with frontline experience and nerves of steel. Both had already resisted the Nazis, first during the occupation of Czechoslovakia and later in France. Both had escaped to Britain, and both understood one thing: this was a mission with almost no chance of survival. They had no illusions of returning to London or even surviving in Prague. But if Heydrich's death could weaken Nazi control over Europe, the mission was worth it. Heydrich had to die. After weeks of brutal training, they were ready. On the freezing night of December 28, 1941, a British Halifax bomber roared over Czechoslovakia, flying low to avoid detection. At around 2 a.m., Gabčík and Kubiš parachuted into the darkness, aiming for a location near Pilsen, but immediately everything went wrong. A snowstorm raged below. The drop zone was missed. The two agents landed 75 miles off target. And worse, Gabčík misjudged his landing and badly injured his ankle on the frozen ground. He could barely walk, relying on Kubiš's help just to stay upright. They were lost, exposed, and vulnerable. In deep snow, any Gestapo patrol could have followed their boot prints and caught them easily. The mission appeared doomed from the start, but thankfully, there was no Gestapo unit anywhere nearby. Instead, a local miller who had witnessed their parachute landing discovered them, hiding in a nearby quarry. As luck would have it, the miller was connected to the resistance. With his assistance, Gabčík and Kubiš boarded a train to Prague, and through his contacts, they were introduced to key members of the resistance network in the city. There, the resistance connected them with safe houses and coordinated their next moves. Carrying fake papers, pistols, grenades, cyanide capsules, and a British Sten gun, the two men slipped into the capital, now the heart of the Nazi Protectorate. For the next 5 months, they lived like shadows, constantly shifting between safe houses arranged by the Czech resistance group. In the shadows, the plan to kill Heydrich began to take shape. Gabčík and Kubiš stalked him for weeks, learning his routes, his habits, his blind spots. They noticed something bizarre. Heydrich, despite being one of the most powerful men in Nazi Europe, traveled in an open-top Mercedes, usually without escort. His only protection was a driver, Johannes Klein. Sometimes Heydrich even walked the streets of Prague with no guards at all. He believed he was untouchable. Even Himmler had advised him to tighten his personal security. But Heydrich ignored the warning. And Hitler? He was furious. Hitler reportedly said, "Such heroic gestures like driving in an open unarmored vehicle or walking in the streets of Prague unguarded are just damn stupidity. Men of importance like Heydrich should know that they are being continually stalked. There are any number of people just waiting to kill him." And he was right. As the weeks passed, Gabčík and Kubiš began searching for the perfect place to strike. They walked and cycled through the city, surveying every inch of Heydrich's daily route, from Prague Castle to his country residence. They searched for a location that offered both a clear shot and a narrow window of vulnerability. The mission demanded absolute precision. One mistake, and they were dead. By early February, they found their opportunity, a tight hairpin turn in the Prague suburb of Líbin. Each morning, Heydrich's Mercedes was forced to slow down drastically at that turn, almost to a walking pace. It was the perfect place for an ambush. Just behind the turn was a public bus stop, giving Gabčík and Kubiš the ideal cover to wait without raising suspicion. Gabčík and Kubiš could blend in with ordinary commuters and wait. So the plan was that Gabčík would fire at Heydrich's car from the front, and Kubiš would throw a grenade from the side to finish off whatever remained. When the resistance received a tip from a Czech insider at Prague Castle that Heydrich would be meeting Hitler on May 27th, and likely leaving the country for several weeks, Gabčík and Kubiš chose that day as the moment to carry out their mission.
You kill Heydrich, and Hitler will tear Prague apart.
Gabčík and Kubiš, despite final pleas from their underground protectors to abandon the mission, decided that it was time to act. On the morning of the 27th of May, Gabčík and Kubiš accordingly positioned themselves near the hairpin curve designated for the attack. Despite the warm weather, Gabčík carried a raincoat over his arm, concealing his submachine gun. On the opposite side of the street, Kubiš was leaning against a lamppost, two highly sensitive fused bombs in his briefcase. A third man, Josef Valčík, who had been parachuted into the Protectorate in December, positioned himself further up the hill, where he acted as lookout for the approaching car. At around 10:20 a.m., Valčík's shaving mirror flashed in the sun, signaling that Heydrich's car was approaching. As the assassins had anticipated, Heydrich's driver slowed down for the bend. When the car turned the corner, Gabčík leaped out, aimed his submachine gun at Heydrich, and pulled the trigger. But in that crucial moment, everything went terribly wrong. The gun jammed, but then Heydrich made a costly mistake. Instead of ordering his driver to speed away, he told him to stop. He pulled out his pistol and aimed it at Gabčík. But before he could fire, Kubiš stepped out of the shadows and tossed a bomb toward the open Mercedes. He misjudged the distance, and the bomb exploded against the car's rear wheel, throwing shrapnel back into Kubiš's face and shattering the windows of a passing tram. The wounded Heydrich fired shots at Kubiš, but due to the smoke, not a single bullet hit him, and Kubiš fled the scene on his bicycle. Meanwhile, on the other side, Gabčík threw away his jammed Sten gun and tried to flee. But escape wasn't easy for him. Heydrich's driver, Klein, chased after him. Gabčík ran into a nearby butcher shop, but quickly realized there was no back door, no exit. He was trapped. But as Klein stepped inside, Gabčík fired 2 shots into his legs and made his escape. After the assassins made their escape, Heydrich was rushed to a nearby hospital. While surgeons worked on him, news of the attack reached both Himmler and Hitler, and their fury was immediate. Himmler was allegedly so shaken that he burst into tears. Both demanded swift and severe retributions. Hitler instantly called for the execution of 10,000 Czech hostages, declaring that the Czechs have to learn the lesson that if they shoot down one man, he will immediately be replaced by somebody even worse. Thankfully, Heydrich's deputy Karl Hermann Frank managed to calm the enraged Hitler. Fearing that mass reprisals could damage Germany's vital economic interests in the region, Frank immediately flew to Berlin to argue his case. He insisted the attack was an isolated act, orchestrated from London, and warned that indiscriminate killings would harm Germany's war effort and could cause the Czech resistance to spread even further. Large-scale massacres, he argued, would also undo Heydrich's effective occupation policies, cripple Czech armament production, and fuel enemy propaganda. His reasoning worked, at least for the moment. Hitler withdrew his order to execute 10,000 Czech hostages, but remained adamant that the assassins must be found and captured without delay. More than 12,000 Gestapo and SS personnel spread out across Prague, raiding nearly 36,000 buildings in their search for the assassins. Yet, despite leaving hardly a single home unchecked, the massive police operation failed to achieve its goal. The assassins were nowhere to be found. The Nazis announced a reward of 10 million kronen for capturing the assassins. Anyone found sheltering or helping them, or even knowing their identities or location, and failing to report it, would be executed, along with their entire family. Meanwhile, as the massive manhunt for Heydrich's assassins raged on, Heydrich seemed to be recovering well, and it appeared he would soon be out of danger. For days after the surgery, his condition improved steadily, and he was alert, speaking to visitors, and even discussed future plans. But on the morning of June 4th, everything changed. Without warning, Heydrich's temperature spiked, and he slipped into a coma. Doctors quickly realized that a deadly infection had taken hold. Within hours, Heydrich's organs began to fail. By midday, it was clear he would not survive. At 4:30 a.m. on June 4th, 1942, Reinhard Heydrich, one of the most feared men in Nazi Germany, was pronounced dead, not from the blast itself, but from septicemia caused by the infection. On June 7, 1942, Reinhard Heydrich's body was placed in a coffin. His funeral procession through Prague was unlike anything the city had ever seen. Streets were lined with thousands of German soldiers in full parade uniform. Military bands played solemn marches as the coffin, carried on a gun carriage, slowly made its way to the station. From Prague, the coffin was transported to Berlin, where the Nazi leadership gathered for a grand state funeral. The hall was filled with black banners and an ocean of SS uniforms.
War einer der besten Nationalsozialisten, einer der stärksten Verteidiger des deutschen Reichsgedankens, einer der größten Gegner aller Feinde dieses Reiches.
Hitler declared Heydrich a martyr. On the other hand, Himmler said, "I am privileged to thank you for your unswerving loyalty and for your wonderful friendship, which was a bond between us in this life, and which death can never put asunder." He also proclaimed that Heydrich was someone who should be emulated, though he acknowledged that no one would be able to achieve such glory. The Nazis gave Heydrich a farewell as if a great saint had died. On the very day of Heydrich's grand funeral, the Nazis received intelligence claiming that his assassins were hiding in the small Czech village of Lidice. Hitler, seizing on this as an opportunity for swift and brutal vengeance, ordered the village to be completely wiped from the map, both as retaliation and as a chilling warning meant to compel others to turn in the killers. But in the days that followed, a grim truth emerged. The reports were false. Lidice had no connection to the resistance, and the assassins had never set foot there. Yet the truth meant nothing to the Nazis. After Lidice, rumors spread that every 10th Czech was to be shot. Despite the wave of terror that engulfed the population, the assassins were still nowhere to be found. The massacre and destruction of Lidice failed to achieve the Gestapo's intended goal. No one stepped forward with clues or evidence about the assassins' whereabouts. Frustrated, the Nazis warned that if the culprits were not handed over by June 18th, more executions would follow across the territory. In the wake of this threat, the Nazis received nearly 2,000 tips, one of them from a man named Karl Tschurda. Tschurda himself was a resistance fighter, but after witnessing the fate of Lidice, he became terrified. As a result, he betrayed the cause for the safety of his family. On June 16, 1942, he went to the Gestapo headquarters in Prague. Although Tschurda did not know the assassins' exact present location, he provided the Gestapo with the addresses of various safe houses they had used. The Gestapo raided these safe houses, and after interrogation, they learned that the assassins were hiding in the church of Cyril and Methodius in Prague. Josef Gabčík, Jan Kubiš, Josef Valčík, and 4 other Czech and Slovak resistance fighters were holed up inside the church of Saints Cyril and Methodius. On the morning of June 18, 1942, 750 heavily armed SS troops and Gestapo officers surrounded the church. The Nazis sealed off the surrounding streets, placing machine guns at key points. They were determined that no one inside would escape alive. At around 4 a.m., the assault began. German troops stormed into the church, where they found 3 members of the resistance, including Kubiš and Valčík, positioned in the upper gallery. A fierce gun battle erupted. Bullets tore through the church's sacred walls as the resistance fighters returned fire with pistols and Sten guns. For over 2 hours, the upper floor became a war zone until the fighters were either mortally wounded or killed. Valčík fought bravely, but was killed in the firefight. Kubiš was gravely wounded and later died from his injuries. Meanwhile, Gabčík and 3 other resistance fighters were hiding in the church's crypt beneath the floor, accessible only by a narrow hidden entrance.
Josef? You should surrender now and save yourselves. Do you hear me?
Through the traitor, Karl Tschurda, the Nazis demanded that the remaining resistance fighters surrender.
You will be treated humanely as prisoners of war.
We will never surrender!
But Gabčík and the others opened fire, and their reply was simple: "We will never surrender." The Germans poured in tear gas, fired through the floor, and even tried flooding the chamber, but the men below fought back relentlessly. They were not seeking escape, they were holding their ground. For hours they returned fire, refusing to surrender. When their ammunition was nearly gone, each man saved a final bullet for himself. Gabčík and the men made their final choice. One by one, they turned their pistols on themselves, not in defeat, but to deny the Nazis the triumph of taking them alive. When the Germans finally smashed into the crypt, all they found were the lifeless bodies of the men who had assassinated Reinhard Heydrich. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Tschurda had received his reward. Had Tschurda not betrayed the cause, perhaps after the war, these men would have been telling the story of Heydrich's assassination in their own words. Imagine Gabčík himself recounting the moment when his Sten gun jammed right in front of Heydrich, and what went through his mind in that split second. Surrounded, outnumbered and wounded, they fought to the last breath, not for medals, not for fame, but for the dream of a free homeland. Today, their story stands as a reminder that even the mightiest tyrant can be brought low by the courage of the few. My name is Roger, and this film was my humble tribute to the men who laid down their lives for their motherland.